Welcome everybody to Remote Daily.
So welcome to Remote Daily, everyone. Our guest today is an amazing artist and a real visionary who founded Groupmuse. What is music and why do we have it? Please welcome Heavy Meadow, aka Sam Bodkin. Hi Sam, it's good to have you here.
I'm so glad to be here, Felix. I just so appreciate how you hold the space. I was really just reflecting on this imaginary world, an imaginal world, where like Conan O'Brien and Jay Leno and David Letterman, instead of like giving like some tacky intro with like lame jokes about what's going on, just like actually held the space for contemplative awareness. And that's sort of somatic presencing. And if that was the mainstream culture every night before the talking began, like we'd be in a better place. So I really appreciate your work.
Wow, I think that is one of the nicest compliments we've ever gotten. Thank you. Thank you so much. And, we found a few photos of you
Yeah.
when you were still sort of like in the New York tech world, being like a founder and like hanging out. There's like photos of you at parties. And I think Madison is gonna screen share one of
Let's
those
see what you
right now.
got.
So this is tech founder Sam. Um, uh,
Indeed. Yeah.
when was the last time you looked like a founder? When was that?
That's a good question. It was a slow process by which I was just like that, all that founder aesthetic was just subsumed by the locks. I haven't gotten a haircut since actually the last time I was just thinking about it. I got a haircut. Last time I got a haircut was before I started playing the ukulele, before I started making music, which is actually kind of mind blowing to me. I think it was 6 years ago. And I did shave for my beloved grandfather's memorial service. My mom, who's in the audience, requested that I did that. So
Shout out, mom.
that, shout out, mom. So that was last October. But yeah, it has been a long time since I've sort of carried myself in that New York City way. I was back there this past weekend, and it was just interesting to feel the ways in which I've grown. And also the excitement and the energy that still absolutely feeds me in New York City. So,
Wow. Well, you're here now as part of another journey that takes you even deeper into your passion
yeah,
into your life's mission of music.
I would love for us to just collectively reflect on this question, this most basic and disarming question of what is music and why do we have it and how can we use it? And what does it look like to intentionally use music in service to the great mission that we're all kind of facing right now as we try to find recalibration and a healthy ecosystem on planet Earth. This idea of the good vibrations, good vibes has become sort of like a tagline for our era in a lot of ways. Like we're looking for good vibes. And, when we think about music as a field of intentionally rendered sound vibrations, we're bringing our goodness and our intention to how we render this vibrational field. It is literally good vibes. I mean, making music is good vibes, and so I feel like that's entirely on point. And then this way in which music can capture memory, I think points to this, ultimately this mystical power to transcend the present moment, to transcend the linearity of time. Somehow music through the alchemy, the kind of resonance alchemy, can capture memory and bring us back to that place. Like when I listen to, speaking of good vibrations, when I listen to the Beach Boys, Pet Sounds in particular, I'm just exactly in my friend's car and it's the summer after sophomore year in high school and it was the only thing I was listening to. And so that resonates very deeply. And then this idea of the universal language, and the fundamental rhythm that underpins our lives. I mean, it starts in our hearts. That's the first sign of life, is a beat. And it's said that music was actually our mode of communion and communication before language. That Leonard Bernstein said in one of his Eliot Norton lectures that music predates sort of thought object language. Mm-hmm. Of course, music is a language, but it's not confined by the parameters of thought objects in the way that linguistics might be. So yeah, all of that just resonates. I mean, it's the most ancient mode of communion, as far as I'm concerned, the most ancient mode of recognizably human communion, wow. as far as I can tell.
So many thoughts on this. I started out in my journalist life as a music journalist, traveling. So like the traveling troubadour. I was a traveling reporter and reporting for
Mm,
public radio and television over in Germany. And one musician said to me that it's basically everything is vibration that we have around us, like the
yes.
universe, the earth, and that's why the music has such a deep connection to us. So riffing off of what you just said, and the second thing about the social connection is what I enjoyed so much being a music journalist is, and whenever you go to a country or a city where you have no idea what's going on there, you meet an artist and you land in the middle of everything that's happening there at the moment, and that always
Yes.
fascinated me as being a key to a world, because artists are so conscious and so aware of what's happening. And so both tie into what you just said, and it is the reason why we have so many artists here joining our format, and why so many artists play such an important role in our lives. And we hosted music specials on Remote Daily for most of 2020 and 21, having, really trying how this medium could work with live music, even jamming together. The latencies couldn't stop us between places like Brazil and New York. And one thing I learned during hosting so many musicians was, don't ask them what they're playing. We even, I think, had one artist who said,
Yes.
"Don't ask me that. I can't describe it, but you can ask me why." And
Yeah.
that is a question that we since have posted to many people. Why do they do it? And even then, some of the artists said, including our own artist in residence, Stadio, said, dude, I don't have an answer. My instrument is the way I talk to you, and this is my language and my way of expressing it. So
Mm.
just riffing off of what you just said, so many things come to mind that we have been through here on Remote Daily. Now, you have not only your life as a traveling troubadour, you also lead actually two organizations at a time. One is Groupmuse, the other one
Yeah.
is Mused Out. We'll talk about both of them in a second. But just to understand, you're an entrepreneur, you're a businessman. We just saw you,
Yeah.
in the early days when you still went to the barber.
When
How
I
do you
looked like it. Yeah.
structure? How do you structure your days? How do you even do that? Because it's not like you cannot afford to play music and make music and create music all day. You have to run these two organizations and companies. How do you structure your days?
There's just so much in flux. There's so much change all the time in what the calling of the work that day, that week, where say Groupmuse is at, where MuseDAO is at, where my path as an artist is at. It's so hard to say. Uh, it's so hard to kind of like articulate any standing structure. What I will say is that it is underpinned by a few places I return to, and that is I always make time for making music in a structureless way. It's how I pray, it's how I commune, it's how I meditate, it's how I transmute anxieties and turn them into something beautiful. And so, no matter what, that is one of the sort of the pillars of the day. And then I've actually, when I was since being on the road, gotten really into vegan cooking, and that kind of became the other bookend of the day. That like at starting at like 4:30 or 5, I start the food ritual, and that the sort of twin pillars of food and music, I think, are actually like it's this kind of yin and yang wholesome like wholeness that is kind of the whole story. It's the power of the earth, the food from the earth, and music from the heavens. And so I hate to be like glib. I'm just being real. I don't really have a standing structure, but the two kind of pillars of the day are making music and being there for that,
Fantastic.
and
You know,
making food in a wholesome way.
most founders would have responded to this question. Oh yeah, we have a stand up in the morning, and then I have a quick check in and around midday with my team, and then we have like happy hours sometimes, and then no, there's music and cooking, and whatever else comes your way, it has to fit into these two pillars. Absolutely fascinating. So let's talk about one of the organizations that you're leading, Groupmuse.
Yeah.
And I have more to look at here. I love this. I love this so much. Again, this is to me is the Sam, right?
Yeah. That was
The
Boston
Sam
Globe.
at
Was that in the Globe?
a
Yeah.
concert. So
Yeah.
Groupmuse is, and we look at the website right now, a cooperatively owned platform with thousands of musicians and hosts countrywide. All who perform here have a standard pay, and the concerts are promoted through the platform, all happening, mostly happening in private places. You told us you have 12,000 and more community members in New York City who are able to host these mostly evening gigs.
Yeah.
So to understand Groupmuse, why are you so passionate about bringing like chamber music, which it mostly is, from the concert halls where we all know it from, into living rooms?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there are a lot of answers. But it's kind of been a recurrent theme in my life. There is a calling, and I'm not exactly sure why it's all-consuming, but just through that listening act and trying to be in service to the calling, all of this, all of these reasons and intentions start in retrospect making so much sense. So at the time, what I'll say is that I just fell completely mad for classical music when I was a 19-year-old, and my parents had tried to get me playing it, but it didn't really take. And I played guitar, I was in bands, but then I discovered a late Beethoven string quartet, and it just completely took over my imagination, my world. And it's the Grosse Fuga, Opus 133, if people are curious, Emerson string quartet in particular, and so it just became this kind of portal into a world of imagination and color and depth that seems so much more profound and resonant than the sort of the suburban monoculture that I think a lot of us growing up in the 90s and the aughts and to this day are sort of like confronted with on the regular, that the culture that is offered by the mainstream is just like not nourishing, and it doesn't really have that ancestral connection, that sense of rootedness. And so I discovered this form of music, and it just started talking to parts of my mind that I didn't even know were there. And I was obsessed and wanted to get all my friends into it. And so I would make mixes, and anyone who expressed the faintest bit of interest, I would make many mixes for. And then I fell in with a group of musicians who were studying at New England Conservatory. And they would gather on, the odd Thursday or Friday night, as young folk do, and they would drink and be merry, but they would also play chamber music at this incredibly high level. And I was lucky enough to go. I was the only non-musician at the time. I was not a musician, the only non-musician there. But for me, it represented this kind of like this holy grail of communion. It was like both a really fun party with the laughter and the flirting and the good vibes, as they say. And there was this world expanding music that had moved through the ages because it was just too good for time to forget. And so it was just the power of that experience that was like, we need more of this. And that was it. So it was just like, this was so good. I want to be involved in bringing it to every living room and every community that isn't so blessed to have so many musicians in their midst, right? Because this is just how musicians hang out. This is their bread and butter. And so that was the original inspiration behind Groupmuse. But then in retrospect, it clearly came from this kind of deep need that is not in me, but it is in me, but is in the wider culture, because of course Groupmuse has only thrived because people have said, this makes sense. Right. I want to be involved. I want to be hospitable. I want to make my home a space for community and ancestral art. And so that resonance clearly started telling a story about what we need right now. And what it really comes down to, I think, is that there's been this conversation around classical music, how to save classical music, and that's in the classical music community just a really wrong-headed conversation, in my opinion. I think a more illuminating conversation is, how does the contemporary culture need support? How do we need to be saved? And what can classical music or ancestral forms of music do in service to that? Mm-hmm. And if you just imagine what that looks like, well, we need more opportunities to connect, to connect with people who we resonate with in non-hierarchical ways, like not in the office where it's like maybe your boss or your underling, but just this sort of like true communion. And we need more substance and depth, and we need more of that connection to that past. So what does it look like when this art form is consciously and intentionally serving those needs? It ends up looking something like Groupmuse. And I do think the proof was in the pudding, because we grew really fast and we've never had real funding.
And you said as preparing for today, that you told us that the classical music world is crazy. It's $1 billion business, but it's also the business where very, very little of that money lands in the hands of the actual artists.
Yeah.
And of course, now we have been through 2 years where this was even that little has been shattered. So how did Groupmuse survive COVID?
Really good question. We moved online, and actually, the average per musician haul doubled during the COVID era when we did the whole thing through Zoom, because we had been so consciously engaged in soulful community building for so many years that actually, while the real world communion is so important to me, the integrity of the connections was able to endure this ridiculous shock. And so when we moved to the online model, we actually, for a little while, we were making like good money and making musicians good money. But then Zoom fatigue set in, and it became clear that actually, in order to make it through the long winter of COVID, we would have to start a 501c3. So we started a parallel nonprofit called the Groupmuse Foundation. Groupmuse is not a nonprofit, as we discussed. It's a cooperatively owned enterprise. But we started a parallel nonprofit called the Groupmuse Foundation. That's a 501c3 to offset, basically to help absorb some of this shock. And it has done that, and it's still, everything is shoestring. But we have been able to not just survive, but I mean, quite frankly, thrive. Last night I was at a Groupmuse in Brooklyn, Bushwick, and the place was a warehouse distillery called Meadow Spirits. We love them. The place was completely packed, like 100 people, overflow, and every generation, just beautiful folk from all corners of the city and all decades of these past 60. So 70, 80, I don't know. It was really an amazing experience to see. And most people I didn't recognize. I knew maybe 2 or 3 people there. But because, I haven't been living in New York City for years, but to see the ecosystem continually renew itself is just a testament to how badly we need it.
And I'm gonna share my screen once again, because I think you posted from Brooklyn on your Instagram at heavy_meadow_, and
Yeah.
you can see this playing out here, and it's just amazing, as you said, like all these people that I've never met before enjoying chamber music in a place where you would least expect it. It's just fantastic what you're able to do. But you're going much further now, and I would like to take a look into the future with you, because you have an amazing vision for how money and how power between artists and us, consumers, and the many, many middlemen that are there, especially in classical music, could be repurposed, shaken up, stirred up, broken, disrupted. You are currently inventing a cryptocurrency for music with a coin called Muse Token, and our new organization, Mused Out, behind it, where you aim to put money kind of like directly into the pockets of artists, instead of relying on the institutions, the philanthropy. So who supports the artists directly? Like, how does this basic model that you're establishing work?
Sure, I'll explain. First, I just want to say that I think that we can all collectively acknowledge that there's this moment of sort of institutional crisis. I don't want to pick on the classical music institutions particularly much, because there are a lot of major powerful institutions that have done so much more damage. The classical music institutions have actually done a really beautiful thing, which is, to the best of their capacity, to create these living art forms that stretch back into the past, and it really hasn't been easy. So I don't want to point any fingers. And also, these are allies of us. We really consider ourselves part of a movement to restore this art form in concert, if you will, with everyone else in the field that cares so deeply for this music. And that's really why we show up, even if the institutions are excessively bureaucratic and somewhat wasteful at times. So now that I've been all diplomatic and political, I'll say that, for the last 10 years, what we've been doing at Groupmuse is we've been decentralizing the sort of the concert, the cultural component of classical music of the classical music ecosystem, saying you don't need to go to the big symphony halls, the 3 big symphony halls, or the 1 big symphony hall that's about to shut down in town. There are musicians everywhere, and your space is perfect for a string quartet. In fact, it's better for a string quartet than the concert hall, because that was for where it was intended. So there's been this relentless effort over these past 10 years to decentralize and sort of create localized empowerment and direct unmediated linkages between enthusiasts, hosts, audience members, and the musicians themselves. But there is this big problem with classical music, which is that, all of the money really gets filtered through these major institutions that, have their own kind of bureaucratic overhead and this sort of momentum that they kind of need to cater to because of how these structures were originally built and the force behind them. So musicians often end up kind of like waiting below these big institutions for what drips out the bottom.
Yeah.
And so what we're doing with MuseDAO, my co-founder Christos and myself, are working to decentralize the economic layer. And what I mean by that, there it is. What I mean by that is really actually incredibly straightforward. A token, like any other asset or commodity, it grows in value when people are buying it, and it loses value when people are selling it. So what we needed to build a functional currency here is a reason why people feel inspired to buy and feel inspired to hold and not sell. So the way this works is that if you are a performing musician maintaining living ancestral musical traditions, when you perform a piece by Johann Sebastian Bach in a community conscious way, like at a Groupmuse, you submit proof of performance to MuseDAO and you get a disbursement of this token. It's that simple. However much you were paid for the performance in US dollars, irrelevant. Whether it was thousands or you weren't paid at all, if you can submit proof of performance and prove that this happened for a community, you get a disbursement of token. Okay. On the other hand, why does the token have any value at all? On the other hand, the token has value because the patronage community, which for 1,000 years has established this robust ritual of paying into this ecosystem, giving the money away for a tax write-off, but really just because they believe in the importance of these living traditions, every year maintaining what is now a multi-billion-dollar ecosystem and industry. That's classical music. So instead of putting all of that money into these bureaucracies, decentralized bureaucracies, instead, if you put that money into the Muse token ecosystem, if you just buy Muse token because you're enthusiastic about this art form, every time you acquire Muse token and become and stake this token, I won't get into staking, but every time you acquire the token, everyone who's holding the token, they experience that lift in their net worth. And the people who are holding this token are, of course, the patrons who are buying it, but primarily the musicians who are getting these token disbursements. And so for all of the froth and insanity and toxic culture surrounding cryptocurrencies, the actual technology is unbelievably useful, transformational, and when grounded in ancestral ritual in this common purpose that has held together community for centuries, I think it'll come into its power in a totally new way that's not like riddled with all the fluff and the foam.
So to unpack this for me, who doesn't hold cryptocurrency, is basically I create a wallet online and then I trade dollars for Muse token, and then I own some of that currency. And now I own the same currency that is actually reserved for artists. The artists you give currency to already. And then if I go to a show, let's say, I don't know, the Chamber Quartet we just saw on your Instagram, I buy a ticket with this token, and that way I raise the value of the currency for the musicians who already hold it. Is that accurate?
Yes. So that is the dream. That is the sort of the 2-year plan. That's when we fully integrated in Groupmuse. I want to make clear, because I saw someone just say that they purchased some Muse, and I'm so grateful. There's another token called Muse.
John is actually holding it into the camera. It just happened. That's Remote Daily community power. Thank you, John.
That's really incredible. I'm humbled. It's not our token because we haven't actually launched our token yet. We're going to be launching our token over the course of the next 2 months. So stay tuned. Follow Muse Token DAO on Twitter, and or you can join our Telegram, and I can provide those details after. but the token is not available for purchase yet. So you did buy a token that has nothing to do with us, but could be cool. You might want to sell. I don't know. Do your research. Yes. So what you're talking about is once we have fully integrated the Groupmuse platform into this ecosystem, into this new economy that we're building. But that's not going to happen for a year or so, because, or perhaps sooner, we'll see, because as you noted earlier, these are really two entirely distinct organizations. Groupmuse has been around for 10 years and has this sort of like this kind of integrity and this coherence and this community essence that is not like, you know, as radical and as willing to engage in sort of like a transformational experimental effort like Meadow in the way that I, myself, the founder, and my co-founder, who's also a worker under at Groupmuse, Christos, like we are seeking to pioneer here and build value in this ecosystem, and then turn back to Groupmuse and say, okay, we're going to invest in Groupmuse. We're going to invest this currency in Groupmuse, provided that you integrate the use of this currency into the ritual of attending Groupmuses. So in a year from now, and the dream is, and we're not there yet, but the dream is that in a year from now, in order to RSVP to a Groupmuse, you buy $5 worth of Muse token. Right now, an RSVP costs $5. So from the user end perspective, it's identical. You're just buying, it's $5 worth of currency, except that on your account, you're actually not spending that money. You're holding that in the form of this currency. So the more Groupmuses you go to, the larger your holdings become, but also the more your friends go to Groupmuse, the more valuable your holdings become. If that makes sense. So for the next year, it's all going to be about making sure that musicians are literate enough to redeem the token. Once they have performed, they submit their proof of performance and they redeem their token. And then on the other hand, recruiting that first generation of adopters, those music enthusiasts who are blockchain literate, who are like, this makes tons and tons of sense. I want to support this art form. But also I know that in supporting an art form that's been supported for 1,000 years, it's probably a pretty safe investment as well. But we're like, the patrons are not there to make a buck. If they were there to make a buck, that would be on the to the detriment of the musicians, you know. So patrons never sell. They hold the token, it grows in value like a piece of art might, but you don't sell because that would diminish the fortune of the musicians. Musicians are allowed to sell because musicians need to buy houses. Musicians need to buy cars. Musicians need to think about retirement. So what we say is that musicians never buy and buyers never sell, right? Because musicians are not there to buy the token. They're there to receive the token for doing the work to maintain these living traditions. And patrons are not there to make a buck. They're there to support the art form. But in so doing, they accrue a digital asset that grows over time.
So, and back to John and everybody else who's like, I want to buy into this right now. The currency has not launched yet. So there's another thing that has a similar name that you can already buy, but the currency will launch in. Do you have a date?
Well, we don't actually have a date. It'll be over the course of the next 2 months. We're building out the portal right now, and it'll be launched over the course of the next 2 months.
So we're pre-news here, and we are obviously there to support you. What a fascinating concept. The musicians hold the currency, they can sell it. The patrons who want to support them buy the currency, and that way you create a new ecosystem. Last question on this. Don't you expect literally everybody who is making money off of classical music right now, which are obviously not the artists as much, to go against this and say, not with us?
I don't think so. We're expecting that it becomes the economic layer that can underpin all of the classical music industry. Our belief is that it simply works better because once musicians understand that they don't actually necessarily need to be waiting on the bureaucracies will start to respond. That's our belief. And I think that you've seen that with, for example, Bitcoin, that, for a long time it was marginalized to the point of basically being a byline for online dark web drug deals. But at this point now, the pension funds have bought in because at the end of the day, you can't resist just sound economics in a world where resources are so scarce and everyone is against the ropes. I mean, the San Antonio Symphony Orchestra just went under, I think it was last week, for good. It's gone. I mean, San Antonio is a huge city and it had a whole symphony orchestra. It's just gone. It's just gone. Wow. And it's this is the world that we're looking at. And while bureaucracies have their own kind of internal logic and they do resist change, at the same time, they're made up of people, and the people that populate these bureaucracies care deeply about this art form. And when they see something that's actually changing the lives of musicians, we believe it'll have the force to kind of overcome that inherent kind of reactionary quality of bureaucracy.
So great to hear from you about this. And amid the sad news, I just saw the articles here about the San Antonio Orchestra. I'm actually going to put that in the chat. The largest American city without a major orchestra was just born, basically. And it just shows how dire this space is coming out of the pandemic, of course, and how much your vision can actually contribute to it. So good to have you here with us, Sam. Is it you did something else which only artists do? In preparing for the show, you said, you know, I write these little songs, I post them online. Do you want to have a song? And we were like, well, of course, yes. And as you're traveling with your uke, you even performed it for us. It's on our Instagram. Would you mind giving us a little glimpse into the remote daily song Heavy Meadow edition?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'll just give a little backstory. I have been, on tour across the country, and the way that I've been building crowds is I'll write a little song to a city, and I'll ask. It'll be like Jacksonville, Florida. Jacksonville, I'm asking, will you host me in your home? It's why I wrote this poem. And then I'll put like 30 or 40 bucks behind it on Instagram to promote it to folk who live in Jacksonville and who are into Bob Dylan and community. And then once I find my host, I'll write them a little invitation song to gather community for their show. And so this was kind of my invitation song to the remote daily hour that we're spending together. And I posted it on my channels, and I'm not sure who turned up, but I like the ditty. So here's how it goes. The time is back. They're all holding questions unasked. Your screen's got a camera. The world wants to hear with your ways to stay here. It would appear that we move daily is a new way. Talk show. Oh no. Father Christmas is your zoomed in presence, and they're dragging heavy on, and they ask me that for every song. So I'm here to say that on Friday I will see your face, and we'll share cyberspace. We'll ponder as one a disarming question: what's the music, and how can we use it? I hope you tune in, and I get you zoom in.
Sam Bodkin, aka Heavy Meadow, live on remote. That remote daily is a new way we do the talk show. Is the best rhyme I've ever heard on the remote daily words. So thank you, Sam. Sam, Heavy, you were an amazing guest. We learned so much from you in this little time. What can we do to support you? What can we do to help you make this mission flourish?
Sure, absolutely. I would say you can follow me on Instagram, heavy_meadow_. You can also sign up at groupmuse.com, make an account, or follow Groupmuse at Groupmuse everywhere. It's one word. And you can follow muse_token_DAO on Twitter. And that's where you'll be learning about that whole movement. So yeah.
Wow, great. And you are someone who is really taking this entire cultural phenomenon that has been with us forever into a new direction. So would you have a final message for all of us who are listening today? Anything that comes to your mind?
Yeah, it's just to make music. You just do it. Just make music. It does not matter where you're at with it or how it's supposed to sound. It's just about your relationship with yourself. And it's something that we all have. So just make music.
Yes. And the relationship to yourself. What a wonderful image you led us into this long weekend with. Sam, thank you so much. Thank you very much.